Hey guys, I'm going to do a video today and we're going to attempt to answer the question, who are the two witnesses? And these are the two witnesses in Revelation 11. And we're going to do this through the lens of little season eschatology. This is what we've been discussing, studying on my channel for over a year now, looking at answering the questions, has the second coming of Jesus Christ already occurred? Has the millennial kingdom of Christ already occurred? And I think after a year of this, we can be confident in answering yes to both of those questions. And again, I think this is going to be a good example how, by looking through the lens of little season eschatology, taking the Bible at its word from prophetic standpoint, taking the prophets at their words, taking Jesus at their words, we can come up with proper interpretation of prophecy, including the two witnesses. In contrast, futurists will look at the book of Revelation entirely in the future and come up with the two witnesses as possibly being Moses and Elijah or Enoch. Whereas preterists, who take everything in the past and spiritualize everything, will not look at this as two literal prophets that were upon the earth during that time of that generation, carrying out judgments, the anointed ones, the two olive trees, that they will rather spiritualize it and say, well, it could be the Old and New Testament, or it could be Israel and Judah, or it could be the law and the prophets. Again, anything but two literal prophets, like the Bible says. But let's look at the passage, and then we're going to answer this question. So let's go to Revelation 11, start at verse 1. And this is John, obviously writing the book of Revelation. And there was given me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship therein. But the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not. For it is given unto the Gentiles in the holy city, shall they tread under foot 42 months. And I will give power unto my two witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the two olive trees and the two candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. And if any man will hurt them, fire proceedeth out of their mouth and devoureth their enemies. And if any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. These have power to shut heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy, and have power over waters to turn them to blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will. And when they shall finish their testimony, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them and kill them. And their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. And they of the people and kindreds and tongues and nations shall see their dead bodies 3 days and a half, and shall not suffer their dead bodies to be put in graves. And they that dwell upon the earth shall rejoice over them, and make merry, and shall sing gifts one to another, because these two prophets tormented them that dwelt on the earth. And after 3 days and a half the Spirit of life from God entered into them, and they stood upon their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them. So this is the passage of the two witnesses in Revelation 11. These are two literal witnesses, two literal prophets. These are those that were part of carrying out the judgments, and these two men were the two olive trees and the two candlesticks. So now let's go further and look at the Old Testament prophet Zechariah to get a better understanding on who these two men are. Zechariah chapter 4 specifically. And we'll read verses 2 and 3 and then 11 through 14. In Zechariah 4:2 it says, And said unto me, What seest thou? And I said, I have looked, and behold, a candlestick all of gold, with a bowl upon the top of it, and his 7 lamps thereon, and 7 pipes to the 7 lamps which are upon the top thereof. So in verse 2, it talks about a candle with a lamp stand with 7 candles upon it. Keep that in mind. Then go into verse 3. And 2 olive trees by it, one on the right side of the bowl and the other on the left thereof. So now we have 2 olive trees standing on either side of the lampstand that has 7 candles upon it. So see this picture. See the 2 olive trees. These are 2 men. These are 2 prophets. These are the 2 witnesses. And they are placing something into the lampstand with the 7 candles in it so that the candles would stay lit. And we read in Zechariah 4:11 through 14, Then answered I and said unto him, What are these 2 olive trees upon the right side of the candlestick and upon the left side thereof? And I answered again and said unto him, What be these 2 olive branches, which through the 2 golden pipes empty the golden oil out of themselves? And he answered me and said, Knowest thou not what these be? And I said, No, my Lord. Then said he, These are the 2 anointed ones that stand by the Lord of the whole earth. So just like the 2 witnesses that stand before the Lord of the whole earth, the 2 olive trees, the 2 candlesticks, we see the same terminology here. Zechariah 4 and John in Revelation 11 are speaking of the same 2 people. The 2 olive trees, which are supplying oil to the lampstands to light up 7 candles. Where do we see 7 candlesticks in the book of Revelation in prophecy that John is speaking of? Well, we go to Revelation 1:20, and it reads, The mystery of the 7 stars which thou sawest in my right hand. This is Jesus speaking to John. And the 7 golden candlesticks, the 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 candlesticks which thou sawest are the 7 churches. So these 7 candles within this lampstand that Zechariah is prophesying of are 7 churches that is being fed oil from these 2 witnesses, these 2 anointed ones, these 2 prophets, so that their light will shine during the time needed. And so let's first speak of who is writing here. John the Apostle. John, a prisoner on the Isle of Patmos, that was given a vision by Jesus Christ of this impending judgment that was to come upon that generation. And this was something that must shortly come to pass, as it says the opening verse of the book of Revelation that John wrote. In verse 3 it says, Blessed is he that readeth, and they that hear the words of this prophecy, and keep those things which are written therein, for the time is at hand. So this letter written by John on the Isle of Patmos when he was a prisoner had a blessing within it, and it was given to that generation. And specifically, it was given during a time of tribulation, as it reads in Revelation 1:9, I, John, who also am your brother and companion in tribulation and in the kingdom and patience of Jesus Christ. And John was commanded to write to the 7 churches, the churches of Pergamum, Thyatira, Ephesus, Sardis, Smyrna, Laodicea, and Philadelphia. These are 7 churches that John was providing oil for, so that their light would be lit, so they would see what was coming upon their generation. He was providing knowledge, wisdom, understanding. He was providing discernment of the upcoming judgments that were coming. He was one of the 2 witnesses. As it says just prior to Revelation 11, where we see the 2 witnesses mentioned that we just read about in the last verse of the previous chapter in Revelation 10:11. The angel says to John, and he said to me, You must prophesy again before many peoples and nations and tongues and kings. And we just heard the same terminology about the peoples and nations and tongues and kings who were celebrating when the beast that ascended out of the bottomless pit killed the 2 prophets. They were sending gifts. They were joyous about this because they, the 2 witnesses, were part of the carrying out of these supernatural judgments. And in verse 11:1, just prior to the 2 witnesses being mentioned that we just read, again, it reads, and there was given me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God and the altar and them that worship therein. So this vision that John is seeing that Jesus Christ is giving him is putting him in Jerusalem in the future to measure the temple and measure the altar and them that worship therein. He is there in Jerusalem. He is there in Jerusalem because he was one of the two witnesses. He wrote 7 letters to the churches that we see at the beginning of the book of Revelation. Like we see Zechariah for the olive trees, putting the oil into the lampstand to light the candlesticks, the 7 churches, so that their light would be on during this upcoming judgment. But wait, we still have another witness to determine. So, John wrote 7 letters to the 7 churches in the book of Revelation. Is there another apostle in the Bible who wrote 7 letters to churches? Yes, the apostle Paul. He wrote 7 letters to the churches in Rome. He wrote 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. He wrote to the Corinthians, the Ephesians, the Galatians, the Colossians, the Philippians. These 7 churches were part of the New Testament that Paul wrote. And Paul was writing proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ. He was proclaiming what they should be doing during this time. And there were many warning verses, especially when you start looking in the book of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, of the coming of Jesus Christ with his angels, with his holy saints, this impending judgment that was coming upon them, that they would see the Lord in the air. That generation. And Paul was writing to these 7 churches. Paul was also a part of tribulation, just like John. We see this several times in his letters. For instance, in 1 Thessalonians 3:4, for truly, when we were with you, we told you before that we should suffer tribulation, even as it came to pass, and you know. Paul was also chosen to be a vessel to preach to the nations and the Gentiles and kings, just like we saw previously in Revelation 10:11 with John, as it says in Acts 9:15-16. But the Lord said to him, speaking of Paul, Go, for he is a chosen vessel of mine to bear my name before Gentiles, kings, and the children of Israel. For I will show him how many things he must suffer for my name's sake. Paul, just like John on the Isle of Patmos, being in prison, also wrote many of his letters from prison. And I think that this is one of the reasons that Paul and John in Jerusalem witnessed in sackcloth, because they had just been let out of prison during this time of tribulation. John off the Isle of Patmos, going to Jerusalem like the vision prophesied that he would, and Paul, who was last seen in Acts 28 in a Roman prison. I believe he was freed and ultimately came to Jerusalem to witness to that generation of these upcoming judgments and the judgments that ultimately they were part of carrying out. We see in Acts 26:16, speaking of Paul, and these are Jesus' words, saying, But rise and stand upon thy feet, for I have appeared unto thee for this purpose, to make thee a minister and a witness, both of these things which thou hast seen, and of those things in the which I will appear unto thee. So I believe just like Jesus Christ appeared to John in a vision prior to him writing the book of Revelation and warning that generation of impending judgments, I think Paul received a similar vision and went to witness in Jerusalem of these judgments. How did the apostle Paul die? Well, there's a lot of speculation, but it's not mentioned in the Bible how he died, unless we understand that he was one of the two witnesses. And then we see exactly how he died. He died just like it says in Revelation 11, but 3.5 days later, him and John were resurrected. They were the two olive trees because they were supplying knowledge, wisdom, understanding, prophecy to that generation of events that were soon to take place. The time was at hand. They were the two candlesticks because they were shining a light as two witnesses to that generation. They both wrote 7 letters to the churches. And that knowledge and wisdom and understanding is the oil that was pumping through the pipes into the lampstand, lighting the 7 candlesticks that we see in Zechariah 4. They were getting the churches in that generation ready for the second coming of Jesus Christ. And that leads me to, what is the meaning of the parable of the 10 virgins, where 5 had oil in their lamps and 5 did not? From this context, you can see exactly what this parable is speaking about. To be watching, to be waiting, to be ready. Again, the book of Revelation, the people who read it received a blessing because they were getting knowledge, wisdom, and understanding from John through Jesus Christ of these events that were soon to take place for that generation. They were wise by reading, by partaking of those things of the church and being ready always. The 5 wise virgins were those who were reading Paul's letters in the book of Revelation. They were reading their Bible and they were understanding, they had the knowledge of things that were soon to take place for that generation. So who are the 2 witnesses? I think through this biblical study, we can now confidently say it was the Apostle Paul and the Apostle John. God bless.